Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, the United States Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism, Elan Carr. Special Envoy Carr advises the Secretary of State and is responsible for directing U.S. policies and programs aimed at countering anti-Semitism all across the world. Special Envoy Carr has served as a Deputy District Attorney in Los Angeles, as an officer in the United States Army Reserve, as the International President of the Jewish Fraternity Alpha Epsilon Phi, and on the National Council of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Special Envoy Carr is also the proud son of Iraqi Jewish parents who fled persecution in Iraq. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Special Envoy Carr.
Well, thank you so much. What a pleasure it is to see not only great friends in the room, but true partners in our mutual and most urgent struggle. I want to begin by thanking our great Attorney General, Bill Barr. How amazing is he and how amazing is this? I got to tell you, this is an extraordinary conference. When you've got the Attorney General of the United States who opens this conference calling anti-Semitism a cancer, when you have the Secretary of Education who comes here to say BDS is anti-Semitism, and when you have the Secretary of the Treasury coming shortly, whose words will certainly be no less strong, and then of course I'm here to represent my boss, our great Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who could not be more of a leader on the subject of fighting anti-Semitism and promoting religious freedom. This kind of conference, extraordinary as it is, could not come at a better time. We meet here today at a time of strikingly rising anti-Semitism across the globe. As Jonathan Tobin said before lunch in the last panel, this is a global problem. Anti-Semitism is up in Europe, where Jews are attacked on the streets of capitals. Anti-Semitism is up in the United States, where vandalism in New York, in Los Angeles, occurs on a fairly regular basis. And when the campuses, as we heard during our last panel, have become hostile places for Jewish and pro-Israel students. In the Middle East, anti-Semitic venom continues unabated. Textbooks continue to inculcate children in vile anti-Semitic hatred. And of course, social media boils over with anti-Semitism. This is a global problem, and just as in Europe and in the Middle East, anti-Semitism has three sources. This country's no different. We've talked about it before, and you all know what those sources are. The ethnic supremacist far right, the anti-Zionist far left, and radical Islam. Three groups that should hate each other more than they hate anything else on earth, and yet mysteriously are united by their hatred of the Jewish people, and I would argue by one other thing as well, and that is by the fundamental incompatibility of their ideologies with everything on which this country was built. Whether it's the ethnic supremacist right, the hostile anti-Western left, or radical Islam, each of those ideologies threatens the United States no less than threatens the Jewish people. But if anti-Semitism is a cancer, as Attorney General Barr so correctly called it, what I want to spend a few moments talking about is the metastatic part of that cancer. The kind of anti-Semitism that is sweeping the globe like a wildfire, including here in the United States, and that is the so-called new anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism that attempts to disguise its Jew hatred as hatred for the state of Israel and for the Zionist endeavor. And that's what I want to speak with you about because, my friends, there is little disagreement that neo-Nazis and their ilk represent true anti-Semitism. And there is little disagreement that terrorists who blow up Jews in buses and cafes reflect anti-Semitism. But it is critical that we confront this so-called new anti-Semitism with no less vigor and no less resolve than we confront any other. In fact, the whole nomenclature of new anti-Semitism, I would argue, is misplaced. There is nothing new about the new anti-Semitism. When one looks down the list of manifestations of traditional anti-Semitism, every manifestation then appears as a manifestation in the so-called new anti-Semitism. Let's begin with the blood libel, the medieval slanders that Jews bake matzah with the blood of children. No different in the so-called new anti-Semitism, when the Jew among the countries is accused of perpetrating genocide, of being an apartheid regime, of infecting Palestinian children with viruses. Blood libels then, blood libels now, nothing new. How about isolation? The classic age-old anti-Semitism that isolates the Jewish community as the outsider, the ominous outsider that undermines the purity of the polity or of the ethnic race. No different. Israel isolated as the other, the ominous outsider, at once different and at once universally controlling. Rhetoric. The same rhetoric then, the same rhetoric now. A Jewish leader in Europe was recently called a dirty Zionist, as though the substitution of a word might confuse us as to what is actually meant. Kill all the Zionists, we heard quoted on the last panel as being a rallying cry of the so-called new anti-Semitism. My own grandfather, a Jewish leader in Iraq, was arrested in 1948. My mother was a young girl when the knock came at the door. He had shaving cream on his face. He was dragged off and paraded through the streets in leg irons before being thrown in prison. But before prison, he was tried, not the kind of trials this place stands for. He was tried for being a Zionist because he was handing out, allegedly, Zionist material at a rally in Baghdad. The only problem with that is, well, let's put aside the problem of whether that should be a crime anyway. Put that aside. The only other problem with it is that he wasn't in Baghdad. He was in Basra. And when his case was called, he said to the judge, "Your Honor, I can bring witnesses to prove that I was in Basra that day. I wasn't in Baghdad. I was nowhere near this rally that supposedly happened. I was working with British officers in the port." The judge said, "You're challenging the accusation against you? For you, 2 years above what you were going to receive already." So it wasn't about him handing out material at a rally. It wasn't about a Zionist rally or the content of that rally. It was about him being a Jew. Same rhetoric then, same rhetoric now. Also similar is the pathological obsession of the hatred of the Jewish people. In the so-called new anti-Semitism, it is no less obsessive, no less foaming at the mouth. A student at a premier university gave me a math answer sheet. I still have it. It says the derivative of so-and-so is such and such, the integral of such and such is so-and-so, and then it says another day in the occupied Palestinian territories, Zionist forces murdering children. And then it returned to math. The kid who gave that to me said to me in a voice reflecting utter exhaustion, "In math class, I can't even escape this? Even in math?" That's right, even in math. Because the new anti-Semitism is no less obsessive, no less pathological, no less insane than the anti-Semitism of old. Also similar is the tendency to blame the Jew for the anti-Semitic response. That was the case all through history. Every pogrom, every orgy of violence blamed against something Jews supposedly did or maybe actually did. By the way, even Kristallnacht, right, that apex, that crescendo of anti-Semitic hatred before the actual extermination was blamed on an action by a Jew. No blood and matzah this time, but a real event, the assassination of a German diplomat by Herschel Greenspan. But just because the Nazis claim that Kristallnacht was a response to something a Jew did doesn't mean we're so gullible as to believe it. We understand that Kristallnacht wasn't a response to anything, but rather furthered the overarching strategy of the Nazis to destroy the Jewish people. We understand that very clearly. So too, the new anti-Semitism blamed always for something the state of Israel does, either fictionally or actually. A building project here, a military operation there. But just like with Kristallnacht, just because those who hate Israel claim that the anti-Semitic response is based on something Israel does, doesn't mean we're so gullible as to believe it. And we understand that their actions are part of their overall strategy of destroying the Jewish state. And finally, economic suffocation. Right? Kauft nicht bei Juden. We've seen those pictures of brown shirts in front of shops throughout Germany. Well, BDS is no different today. Don't buy from the Jew among the countries, thereby attempting to achieve through economic suffocation what no army has been able to achieve, the destruction of Israel. And so there is nothing new about this so-called new anti-Semitism. It is Jew hatred, plain and simple, and must be treated as such. And the bad news I have for you today is that it is working. You see, these BDS votes aren't really about universities divesting from Israel. No university is going to listen to what a group of students vote. But what BDS is really about is poisoning the well of pro-Israel support in this country and in Europe. A recent survey done, a rigorous poll done of Jewish students in the United States, shows that Jewish students on college campuses today are less supportive of Israel than ever before, more inclined to view Israel as a problem than ever before, even more sympathetic toward terrorism than ever before. And evangelical Christians, well, the top issue at every conference of evangelical Christians is how we're losing the young people. And how do we keep the young people pro-Israel? I spoke to one kid at a rally in Los Angeles. He ran up to me and said, I'm here as a volunteer. I love Israel. And I said to him, tell me something, Matthew. I have a question. Is it true that young evangelical Christians are less supportive of Israel? He said to me, oh my goodness, it's absolutely true. It's everywhere around us. I said, why do you think that is? You know what he said to me? He said, because we also go to college. We also hear it all the time, from every angle, relentlessly. Jews and evangelical Christians, those aren't just any two communities. That's the base. If those two groups are being turned, just imagine everyone else. That's here. But let me tell you about the United Kingdom, from which I just returned 2 days ago. You know what's happening in the United Kingdom. And thankfully, I can report that the civil war within the Labour Party is intensifying, fought by good people who are determined to rid themselves of anti-Semitism. But let me tell you about the most disturbing meeting I've had in the last 5 months that I've been on this job. And let me tell you, in my business, I have many disturbing meetings, but this one stands out. It was with the Labour Party MP who walked out of the Labour Party, not Jewish, walked out of the Labour Party because she said, I will not sit at the same table as anti-Semites. I met with her and she said to me, this disaster that we have in England all started on the campuses, and we did nothing because they were only students. And then it moved into the Labour Party, and we did nothing because it was just the far left fringe. And today, they've won and we've lost. And I no longer have a party anymore. My friends, the warning to our country could not be any clearer. And the urgency of this time in which we meet could not be any more apparent. Now is the time. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now is the time to save our future from what is impending on the horizon. And that's why this is so important. I'll leave you with good news. One of the great assets we have in this fight is a U.S. administration committed in unprecedented fashion to this fight. Think about it. State, justice, Treasury, and education. Every player that can apply real force to this problem is here today. And it didn't just start today. Last week, we were at a PCC at the White House, where this issue was the topic of conversation, a coordinating meeting at the White House with White House staff to say, how can we make this an administration-wide fight? And so now we get it. And we're going to fight this fight together, and we're going to apply every legal force that we can, not only to protect and save the Jewish people, although that would be cause enough. My goodness, that would be cause enough. But we're going to fight this fight because what is at stake here is the future of our country, nothing less than that. The kind of free, decent, democratic society we want our kids to inherit. Our children who deserve the very best, who deserve for us to bequeath to them a future better than ours, a society more just than ours. If we don't win, God help us. God help us, and God help them and their future. And so, my friends, I stand before you today as part of an administration-wide fight that is determined not to contain this scourge, but to roll it back, to excise it, and to really build a better future, the kind of future that our children and that our grandchildren so richly deserve. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here and all that you do.
Thank you, Special Envoy Carr, for those stirring remarks and reminder of the global scope of this problem that we're addressing today. Our next panel is entitled Prosecuting Hate Crimes. And we're honored today to have introductory remarks from a true and trusted friend of the Department of Justice. Rabbi ABBA Cohen is the Vice President for Federal Affairs, Washington Director, and Counsel for Agudath Israel of America. Rabbi Cohen has had a long and distinguished career in Washington, D.C. as a well-known and effective advocate for religious liberty and on issues of great import to the Jewish community. As I said, we are proud to number him among our closest and most trusted friends here at the department. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi ABBA Cohen.
Thank you to the department and to Attorney General Barr for convening this important summit on the compelling and critical issue of anti-Semitism. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some introductory observations, not on the technicalities of hate crimes, laws, and policy. I will leave that to the panelists, but on how I see the issue from the inside, on a personal and community level. We all know the statistics, we've heard them today. Anti-Semitic hate crimes have been spiking, comprising 60% of all religion-based hate crimes. Indeed, statistics continue to indicate while all hate and all hate crimes are abhorrent, anti-Semitism maintains its dubious distinction as the mother of all religion-based hatreds. In my position, I am often asked, why has anti-Semitism increased? Why, based on the hate crime statistics, is anti-Semitism stronger today than in the past? And my answer is that I don't believe that the reality and the attitudes of anti-Semitism have per se changed much. But I do believe that the readiness to openly express anti-Semitism has, as manifest in the increase in hate crimes. In the post-Holocaust era, we sensed an inhibition a self-consciousness, perhaps even a feeling of shame to openly express anti-Semitism. More recently, however, at home and abroad, anti-Semites have come out from behind their rocks and are more comfortable and confident to express blatant anti-Semitism. They are emboldened by the hateful words that one can hear now in respectable quarters and intellectual conversations, in academic circles, the political arena, on social media, in masked debates on Israel and the Middle East, and in human rights advocacy. Anti-Semitism seems to have moved from grotesque bigotry to just another acceptable opinion. And it is this societal acceptability that is frightening and dangerous. And it is this acceptability that inevitably transforms it from words to violent crime. As a community representative, I am naturally asked questions about anti-Semitism and Jewish security, and I try to give my best policy wonkish analysis and response. Long-term consequences, short-term consequences, what is real, what is not, what might be an aberration. But I am also a father and grandfather, and today I'm also representing my children and grandchildren. My kids read news stories and are alarmed. They ask, is it safe for us here? Should we move? Our neighborhood has had a number of incidents. Can I let the children take the bus, go to the park, walk the streets? And for me, it's chilling, because around 55 years ago, when I was around 8, growing up in Washington, D.C., just a few miles away from here, I took the bus home every day from the Hebrew Academy, and wearing my yarmulke, had to walk several blocks from the stop to our house. On more than a few occasions over the years, I was taunted, called ugly names, and roughed up. I was frightened to make that walk each day. Now, over a half century later, I'm hearing a similar fear coming from my own children and grandchildren. With all my policy wonkishness, I never feel good after talking to my kids about these things. I always end the conversation a little unsettled, because deep down inside, they are afraid. And there is nothing worse than living in fear, and there is nothing more difficult to overcome. And sometimes, their questions are better than my answers. This is the reality in which we live. Our synagogues, schools, community centers, camps, charities, and other Jewish organizations and institutions, and the people that occupy those spaces, are vulnerable targets and face risks that are real. We are reminded of this reality every day when we need to know the codes to get through the doors for morning and evening prayers, and when our children pass through school entrances manned by armed guards. And we are beginning to engage in surreal and gut-wrenching discussions. Should rabbis, congregants, teachers come to synagogues and schools armed? Are our lockdown mechanisms in place? Are our active shooter plans ready to be implemented? Should we take the signage off of our buildings? We are vulnerable in urban areas like Pittsburgh, my wife's hometown, where we often visit, with a large Jewish population and a rich Jewish history. And we are vulnerable in newer, smaller, more suburban and remote settings like Poway, California, two very different places that stunned us for their wanton brutality and inspired us by the selflessness and heroism of the victims and the police. And it is ironic, at least to me, that even after witnessing the horror of mass shootings, it is still shocking to view the videos in recent months of identifiably Jewish men simply walking down their neighborhood streets and suddenly, without provocation, being pushed or punched or pummeled. And there is a new hate crime that a growing number of Orthodox communities are experiencing: the use of zoning and land use ordinances by those who unabashedly admit their intentions to keep the Jews out. While these actions might not fit the technical definition of hate crimes, nonetheless, that is exactly what they are. I confess that I worry about our Jewish schools, the depraved souls, terrorists and extremists from home and abroad who have openly announced their intentions to murder Jews are not above killing the young and innocent in the bedlam and vulnerability of a school setting. Over the years, we have received numerous calls from schools about suspicious loiterers, phone callers, and mailings. Several years ago, in my daughter's school, a Saudi national was caught videotaping the girls going in and out of school during arrival and departure times. How does a parent process that? Perhaps the most frightening thing of all is that we know it will happen again. We know that despite our best and most determined efforts, there will be another attack. We don't know where or when, but it will happen again. Because after all, they are hate crimes. And as I mentioned earlier, hatred of Jews is becoming more fashionable, not less. And so we wait. We wait, but we must also act, because the saving and safeguarding of life is an overriding Jewish precept. While we applaud Congress and state legislatures that have shown sensitivity to the issue and have passed helpful laws, we will continue to press for even more comprehensive legislation. While we congratulate and deeply appreciate the commitment and bravery of federal, state, and local law enforcement, we will work cooperatively with authorities for even better implementation of tracking, reporting, response, and other critical areas. Jewish organizations will continue to liaise with government officials and community institutions to devise, inform, assist, and provide guidance on how best to secure facilities, address problems and concerns, and hopefully allay fears. And we will continue to work hard for significant increases in security grants to help protect at-risk nonprofits, desperately needed increases that are currently the subject of an urgent effort in Congress and in some state capitals. Finally, I will tell you what we will not do. We will not stop living, even if it's not quite business as usual. We will continue to go to synagogue. We will continue to send our children to Jewish schools and camps and community centers. We will continue to organize, congregate, and advocate as Jews. We will do this because, despite the adversity, life and Jewish living is precious, and it is who and what we are. And we will do it because when it comes to anti-Semites and their hatred, rooted in our history, heritage, and religious faith, is the firm belief that we will outlive them. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen, for those excellent remarks. Our next panel will now join us on the stage, and the topic is prosecuting hate crimes. Our moderator is Josh Rogan. Mr. Rogan is a distinguished columnist for the Washington Post, covering foreign policy and national security. He's also a political analyst for CNN and has previously covered foreign policy and national security issues for a variety of publications. Welcome to our panelists. And Josh, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Josh Rogan. I'm a columnist with the Washington Post. Thanks for including me in today's conference on combating anti-Semitism. This panel is on hate crimes prosecutions, and we really couldn't have a better panel of top officials and practitioners. And what we're going to do here is we're going to give each of our panelists about 5 minutes to give opening statements. Then I'm going to engage them in a discussion about some of the issues in the day. First, we are going to have DREIBAND, who is I'm sorry, what's your title?
Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights.
Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. Then Calvin Shivers, the Deputy Assistant Director for the Criminal Investigative Division of the FBI. And then, of course, Jessie Liu, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. DREIBAND, please go ahead. Thank you.
Well, Josh, thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend today. This is an important issue. And what I thought I would do in my opening remarks is simply talk really about two things. One, the Department of Justice's Hate Crimes Enforcement and Prevention Initiative, and two, talk about a few examples of our criminal prosecutions. I head the Civil Rights Division, and we, along with the United States Attorney's offices, work with the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and local law enforcement to help investigate, but primarily in our case to prosecute hate crimes, including in particular anti-Semitic hate crimes that we've seen around the United States. Our initiative is something that started in 2017. We have a new website, which I encourage you to look at www.justice.gov/hatecrimes. We use that website as well as our initiative about hate crimes to coordinate training, outreach, enforcement, data collection, and other works with national, regional, and local law enforcement and other groups like the Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish Community Center Association, and other groups who are dealing with anti-Semitic hate crimes in the United States. We use our website as a centralized portal for the department's hate crime resources, including information about training, technical assistance, statistics as well. We also have here at the Department of Justice something called the Task Force on Crime Reduction and Public Safety, and we have a hate crimes subcommittee of that task force, and they also focus on hate crimes, particularly anti-Semitic hate crimes throughout the United States. In the last couple of years, we have hosted several hate crime summits and hate crime events, both here at the Department of Justice and throughout the United States at the local level. And I'll just mention a couple. One, we had a National Law Enforcement Roundtable on hate crimes in October of last year that we hosted. The United States Attorney's Office in the Western District of Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh and the FBI also convened a community meeting in response to the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting that occurred in October of 2018. We've worked with the Anti-Defamation League, the United States Attorney's offices, and you're going to hear more about that from United States Attorney Jessie Liu, who's to my left. But we worked with them in raising awareness and securing sacred places and spaces in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania as well. Many of my colleagues here at the department continue to speak out about the plague of hate crimes throughout the United States. And with that, I want to talk about a few of our relevant cases. Since January of 2017, the Civil Rights Division has obtained indictments against 16 defendants and 11 convictions in cases involving arson, or other attacks or threats against places of worship. And that we've also obtained, this is just the Civil Rights Division now, 13 indictments and 9 convictions involving hate crimes against individuals because of their religious beliefs. And I'll just talk about a few examples of that. In August of 2017, an individual in Florida pleaded guilty to federal hate crimes for trying to attack or attempting to attack a synagogue in Aventura, Florida, and attempting to use a weapon of mass destruction. He was sentenced in November of 2017 to 25 years in prison. In February of 2018, the Department of Justice obtained an indictment of a man who made multiple threats and calls involving bomb threats and active shooter threats to numerous Jewish community centers throughout Florida, for threatening other people there. And he was charged both in Georgia and in Florida, and that case is ongoing. In September of 2018, a Wisconsin man was indicted for threatening the Harry and Rose Sampson Family Jewish Community Center. And most recently, I think there are 2 cases in particular I want to talk about, which some of you may know about. One is the one I mentioned earlier involving the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where an individual there, we allege, named Robert Bowers, killed 11 individuals who were at the synagogue while they were worshiping, practicing their faith. He also injured several other people, including law enforcement individuals. And then most recently, just a month or so ago, at the Chabad of Poway Synagogue in California, the Civil Rights Division, along with the United States Attorney's Office and working with the FBI, obtained an indictment of an individual who murdered 1 person and attempted to murder 53 other people at that synagogue. And finally, what I would say is this work, unfortunately, will continue, but here at the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, as well as the department as a whole, will continue to prosecute anti-Semitic hate crimes vigorously so that all people, no matter their faith, throughout the United States can live their lives freely, can worship freely, and without fear. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shivers. Please, feel free to make a
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Calvin Shivers. I'm a Deputy Assistant Director in the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. And what I'd like to do is to give you an overview of the FBI's Civil Rights Program, which encompasses hate crimes. Within the FBI's Civil Rights Program, hate crimes is the #1 priority, and this is based on the significant impact that these types of crimes have on communities. Understanding the FBI, how we work it in the definition, we define hate crime as a criminal offense motivated in whole or part by the offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, ethnic or national origin, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. In order for the FBI to initiate a hate crimes investigation, we look for 3 things. First, we look for an act of violence or a threat of violence. Number 2, the perpetrator must have acted willfully. And then finally, the perpetrator's actions must have been motivated by a bias towards the victim. One of the things that we look at when we look at hate crimes is the distinction between a hate incident and a hate crime. And sometimes there's a little bit of confusion. So I just described what a hate crime is, and I talked about a criminal offense motivated in whole or part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, national origin, gender, or gender identity. A hate incident is more of an act by conduct or through words, motivated in part by a bias against a protected characteristic of an individual, a group, or an establishment in which there's no violation of law. So by example, if I called someone a racial slur and there's no physical threat or physical assault, that is protected by the First Amendment. And so non-threatening hate conduct, no matter how offensive or bigoted, it's protected by the First Amendment. However, if that slur evolves into an act of violence or a threat, then you potentially have a hate crime. One of the things to understand about hate crimes is hate crime investigations are, by their very nature, reactive. When an incident occurs, sometimes it's very difficult to immediately determine whether or not this particular act is a hate crime or an act of domestic terrorism. From the FBI's perspective, we're not really concerned what category it falls into. Our primary concern is to first and foremost address the threat. Next, we are concerned about the victims, so we want to provide the appropriate care for victims, and from there we focus on the investigation. And from the investigative perspective, we bring the full force of the FBI to bear from the lens of not only the Criminal Investigative Division, but also from the Counterterrorism Division. And we work collectively, and again, the initial assessment is not as important as addressing the issue and the victims, and then the investigative piece. And because hate crimes and domestic terrorism sometimes intersect, we address the hate crimes again from the criminal perspective, but also from the perspective of domestic terrorism. And there are a number of instances where we would work a parallel criminal investigation into hate crime as well as a domestic terrorism investigation. And so what we've understood by analyzing and sharing intelligence between the Criminal Investigative Division and our Counterterrorism Division, what we hope to do is to prevent hate crimes before they occur. But again, if they do occur, we work diligently, collectively, as one FBI to address and hold those responsible accountable for their actions and seek justice for victims. One of the things that the FBI has done within the last few months is to develop a hate crimes domestic terrorism fusion cell. And again, because of the overlap between domestic terrorism and hate crimes, we have subject matter experts on the domestic terrorism side working with our civil rights investigators to aggressively address the threat. Now, how does the FBI address the threat beyond just a typical investigation? Law enforcement support for us is important. And this is not only working with our federal partners, but also our state and local partners. We will expend FBI resources even if there will not be a federal prosecution. We provide our forensic expertise, as well as experience in identification and proof of hate-based motivation. And so we work hand in hand with our state and local partners, again, not always focused on the federal prosecution, but addressing the issue. From the outreach perspective, the FBI forges partnerships, again, with our partners not only in law enforcement, but in the civil rights community, within minority and religious organizations, and with NGOs. And one of the things that we understand is very important is that you have to establish those relationships before there's an incident, and that's very important. And so for us, the law enforcement piece, but also the outreach of reaching out to these organizations is critical. And then we have our National Training Initiative. And through our National Training Initiative, we seek to educate and train not only, again, our law enforcement partners, but all of our community partners. We, throughout the year, will conduct hundreds of seminars and workshops with our law enforcement partners in communities, helping our citizens and our partners understand the law enforcement perspective, but also understanding the laws. And again, it's important to provide this educational piece. And following the tragic events in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015, we established a Protecting Houses of Worship. And what we understood was not only that incident, but also incidents targeting synagogues, churches, and mosques. And what we understood is that we should work with the community to better train and to better prepare our houses of worship in the event they have to deal with an active shooter situation. And then we have our data collection and dissemination. Historically, the FBI has used the Uniform Crime Report to collect and disseminate comprehensive data relative to hate crimes. The UCR program is being transitioned to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. NIBRS collects data that is more comprehensive than the UCR, and what that will do is provide not only the FBI, but our law enforcement partners, policymakers, with greater detail as they seek to address the hate crime issue. So when you look at hate crime statistics, and if you look at bias crimes over the last 3 years, there are 3 groups that have consistently been in the top 3. And those are, number 1 being in race and ethnicity, followed by religion, and followed by gender or sexual orientation. And so if you look at the 2017 UCR, more specifically, race and ethnicity represented 58%, religion 22%, and gender, sexual orientation 16%. But breaking within those specific groups, the most affected group within race and ethnicity was African Americans, representing 49%. And from religion, anti-Jewish sentiment was top at 58%. And then when looking at gender and sexual orientation, male anti-gay bias represented 58%.
Well, thank you all very much for having me here. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here to discuss this very important topic, which also happens to be one of great personal interest to me. My husband and my 3 children are Jewish, and my father-in-law was actually born in Vienna in 1934 and fled to the United States with his family because of the Nazi occupation of Austria. So we just celebrated a bar mitzvah. It was a
Mazel
little
tov.
touch and go with the Haftorah up until the very end, but we have got it all straightened out. So again, it really is great to be here and to be talking about this critical topic. Eric and Calvin focused in large part on the enforcement of federal hate crime statutes, so I thought I would touch on 2 slightly different but complementary tools for hate crime deterrence, disruption, and prosecution. But first, I'm going to say a few words about the use of non-federal statutes to prosecute hate crimes, and then I'm going to say a few words about the use of statutes, federal statutes, other than the federal hate crime statutes to prevent and disrupt potential hate crimes. So let me start with a brief discussion about the use of non-federal, in other words, state or local statutes to prosecute hate crimes. Some of you may know that my U.S. Attorney's Office here in Washington, D.C. is unique among the 94 U.S. Attorney's offices in the country because we investigate and prosecute not only violations of the United States Code in federal district court, but also of the local statute, the District of Columbia Code in D.C. Superior Court. Indeed, most of our prosecutions occur in D.C. Superior Court. D.C. has a relatively expansive, what's called a bias-related crime statute. It prohibits criminal acts that demonstrate an individual's prejudice based on, quote, the actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age, marital status, personal appearance, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, family responsibility, homelessness, physical disability, matriculation, or political affiliation of the victim of the act in question. So this is broader than the federal hate crime statutes in a number of ways. It does address a number of additional protected classes. It also applies not only to violent conduct like assaults and attempts to cause bodily injury, but also to crimes like injury to property, theft, unlawful entry, burglaries, robberies, and arson. And finally, it does not require an interstate nexus, as some of the federal hate crime statutes do. So in many ways, it is broader. DC also has an active terrorism statute, which is commonly referred to as a domestic terrorism statute, and that applies to criminal acts taken with the intent to intimidate and coerce a significant portion of the civilian population of the District of Columbia and the United States. I raise these examples just to point out that there may well be state or local statutes in jurisdictions all across the country that also would apply to hate incidents or hate crimes, and that it's important to think about sort of the broad range of ways that we as a country can tackle this problem. Second, my office has in many instances used federal criminal statutes that are not the federal hate crime statutes to address conduct that involves the violence or risk of violence based on hate directed at a particular group. Late last year, for example, we charged a defendant under a federal firearm statute for being an illegal user of a controlled substance in possession of a firearm, but that particular defendant had come to the attention of authorities because of certain public statements that he had made supporting white nationalism and indicating that he had fantasized about race and religion-based violence. We had another case in which an individual called in bomb bomb threats to some Jewish community centers here in the district and to the Israeli embassy, and we prosecuted that person under the interstate threats and bomb hoaxes statutes. Same principle applies with respect to local statutes. There may be, and I know there are in DC, statutes that may apply to conduct like this that can be used in addition to or instead of the federal hate crime statutes. So if there's an instance, we take an all tools approach, so if we can charge a hate crime, we certainly will. If for some reason we can't, and maybe not all the elements are met, we look for other ways that we can address criminal conduct. So again, it is really a great pleasure to be here and to engage in this discussion with my distinguished co-panelists and everybody here in the audience.
Thank you so much. All right. I think that was a great set of introductions. I'd like to start off by asking one question to all three panelists. And, you know, for those of you who have been here all day, you've heard a lot of panelists talk about the rise in the statistics of hate crimes. Of course, anti-Semitic hate crimes, but all hate crimes. According to the FBI's own 2017 hate crime statistics, the increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes, which are the most common religious hate crimes in the United States, is well documented. But what I'd love to hear from these officials, from you guys, is why is that? What do you see? What do you think? What is your analysis of why we're seeing in 2017, and of course the new numbers aren't out, but we can presume in 2018 and 2019, higher levels of hate crimes, both anti-Semitic hate crimes and all types of hate crimes? And we'll please start with Eric DREIBAND, the Assistant Secretary for the Civil Rights Division.
Assistant Attorney General.
I messed it up twice. Assistant Attorney General. Excuse me.
I'm not going to answer the question because I can't read the minds of hateful people who decide to commit despicable crimes motivated by anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of bigotry. I don't know why, if there is an increase in hate crimes, why these people are doing what they're doing, other than to say this, that if they commit a federal hate crime involving anti-Semitism, racial bigotry, or other protected categories of the various federal hate crime laws that we enforce, we will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. And I think no one should be fooled by this, especially anyone who might in any way be contemplating such a hate crime and watching us on C-SPAN right now. I would direct your attention to an event that occurred a few weeks ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, where an individual pleaded guilty, and he pleaded guilty, and the judge sentenced him to multiple life sentences in prison when, in August of 2017, at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, he drove his car into a crowd of peaceable protesters there. We allege that he was motivated by hatred, racial hatred, as well as anti-Semitic hatred and other forms of bigotry, and he will now spend the rest of his life in prison. And so all I can say, Josh, is that the Attorney General has made hate crimes a priority for the Civil Rights Division and for the Department of Justice generally, and that we will continue to prosecute anyone who commits these crimes anywhere in the United States.
Before we move on, thank you for that answer, but let me press you a little bit further. You know, if we don't have an idea of why the hate crimes numbers are increasing, then how can you adjust your prevention policies to account for that?
Well, as Calvin said, and I agree, what we do is that we work with United States attorneys' offices throughout the United States. We work with state and local governments. We work with local law enforcement, and we work with religious leaders and other organizations to raise awareness of these issues. We do live in a country of over 300 million people, and so it does remain a challenge for us given the limited resources we have. But we do work with a lot of people to raise awareness of the problem and to target our enforcement efforts where we can, and frankly, to deter people through aggressive enforcement of the law.
Thank you. Mr. Chivers.
Yes, I will echo some of Eric's comments in that it is very difficult to pick a definitive reason as to why there's an increase in statistics. But one thing I would like to point out is that I've talked about statistics from the FBI's perspective through the Universal Crime Report, or UCR. And one of the things that we've noted is over the last few years, the number of agencies that have reported hate crimes to the UCR has increased. Now, does that necessarily equate to there are more agencies reporting to more hate crimes. We do not have a definitive answer to that, but we treat each particular hate crime on its own merits. And as Eric pointed out, we work very closely with the Department of Justice to address all hate crime investigations, and we leave no hate crime investigation unaddressed. Again, number one priority within the Civil Rights Program. But one of the things that we understand, and I think both Eric and Jessie talked about it, and it's a community effort, it's a community issue with law enforcement, not just from the federal perspective, but the state and local partners play a critical role, because just like in most incidents, the first responder to an incident more than likely will be a state and local police officer. So they play a very important role. But as the FBI, one of the things that we've set out to do, again, is to not only provide training to our community partners, but also our law enforcement partners. And so what we've seen within the last even year to 2 years is the number of agencies that are reporting hate crimes has gone up. And we hope that through continued outreach and through continued coordination and collaboration that we will continue to get more agencies to report on hate crimes.
So just to be clear, are you arguing that part of the increase in the hate crimes statistics is due to increased reporting, not increased hate crimes?
I cannot make a definitive correlation, but I do want to point out the fact that more agencies, and keep in mind, UCR reporting is voluntary. So there are a number of agencies that could report that have chosen not to. So again, if we can get more agencies to report, it would give us a better and more accurate reflection of what the hate crime threat actually looks like.
Thank you. From U.S. Attorney Liu, from your perspective, are the hate crimes going up, or are the reporting going up, or both?
Well, I think we have all of the, we all have the same statistics in front of us with respect to both the number of reported hate crimes and the level of reporting. I'm very loath to speculate at all as to reasons behind the numbers because, as both Eric and Calvin said, we can't necessarily know exactly what's in the head of even one actor, much less people generally who commit these acts. What I will say is that, in my office, when we have a potential crime that comes in, we look at all of the tools that are available to us to address that alleged crime. And it could be a federal hate crime statute, it could be a local hate crime statute, it could be one of the statutes, or one that I haven't mentioned, that is not a quote-unquote hate crime statute, but nonetheless is very effective in holding a criminal actor accountable. And so that's what we're really focused on, is addressing the action. And if we charge a hate crime, yes, we charge a hate crime if we believe that we can make out all of the elements beyond a reasonable doubt, which is also always our lodestar. We will certainly do that. There may be cases where we think that the better way to address it, or the stronger case we have, is using one of the other statutes. But we certainly won't shy away from trying to figure out the best way to address the conduct that we have in front of us.
I understand. Thank you. Let me turn back to you, Eric Dreiban, the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. You mentioned the Charlottesville prosecution. As you know, many of the administration's critics believe that the president's rhetoric and policies, build a wall, Muslim travel ban, telling members of Congress to go back to their countries, worsens the climate of hate and creates more of an environment where these hate crimes are perpetrated, tolerated. What would be your response to those critics?
Josh, what I'm focused on, and what the Department of Justice is focused on, is preventing hate crimes and prosecuting them when they occur. So with respect to preventing them, I'll give one example. We had a case in which an individual cooperated with law enforcement, and we learned of a conspiracy to blow up an apartment building and a mosque. They had not acted yet on that, but we were able to arrest and charge and prosecute and ultimately convict the individuals for committing a conspiracy to commit a hate crime. And that's something we do through outreach, through public awareness and raising public awareness of these kinds of acts. And when we can prevent these acts before the violence occurs, particularly when there is some kind of conspiracy to commit a hate crime, including anti-Semitic hate crimes, we act as promptly as we can. Secondly, of course, as I said earlier, we prosecute fully hate crimes, and we do it aggressively, and those are the direct orders of the Attorney General of the United States, both Attorney General Sessions and Attorney General Barr have prioritized the prosecution of hate crimes here at the Department of Justice, and that will continue as well. So that's what we're focused on. That's what our prosecutors, our investigators, that's what we're working with Jessie and Calvin at the FBI and others on doing, and that's our focus.
I understand. As a follow-up question, some of the civil rights non-governmental organizations who follow your activity have, and I'm sure you know this, have been publicly critical of what they call too much of a focus on prosecution and not enough focus on prevention. They point to some of the policy changes that were made at the Justice Department over the last 2 years. What would you say to those who look at some of the policy changes that you've made? For example, rolling back the use of dissent decrees and other steps as examples of an administration policy that focuses too much on hate crimes after they've already been committed and not beforehand.
Well, first of all, I would say a couple things in response to that. I think it's terrific that we live in a country in which we have the First Amendment to the Constitution, and that various groups are free to criticize the Justice Department and our public officials to the full extent that they can, and that I think is what you're suggesting has happened here. Secondly, there has been no rollback on consent decrees, number one. Consent decrees are a form of resolutions of civil cases. We utilize them frequently in the Civil Rights Division, including when we settle various civil rights cases civilly. Consent decrees have no impact and no role in criminal prosecutions at all. And finally, with respect to prosecutions, we've also focused on prevention of hate crimes, as I mentioned, and we've created a hate crimes prevention initiative. Anyone can look at our website, on the Justice Department website, and take a look and see what you think. But the critics can continue to make suggestions, and we welcome criticism, particularly when it's constructive, but we will continue aggressively, as I said earlier, to prosecute hate crimes throughout this country and do what we can to prevent them.
Thank you. Let me turn to you, Mr. Shivers. In recent FBI testimony, it was pointed out that violent extremists are increasingly using social media for the distribution of propaganda, recruitment, target selection, and incitement to violence. Can you talk a little bit about what the FBI is doing to address that particular part of this problem, and also what do you think is the responsibility of social media companies and social media platforms to address the problem of hate on their websites?
Well, I'll start by saying that all of our citizens have the right to exercise their First Amendment right. And so we in the FBI, when you look at whether or not we monitor individuals or organizations, we usually require, well, I shouldn't say usually, but there's a legal process. And so we adhere to that because we understand, especially when you talk about some of these individuals and groups, there's the balance of the First Amendment right to free speech. And so for us, that's something that we have to be very careful of. I won't speak to the responsibility of social media companies because, again, when you look at the First Amendment issue, individuals have the right to exercise their First Amendment right. Where we get concerned is if we get into an investigation and it is used as a mechanism to communicate and prepare for some type of act, that's where we would get involved. And again, there's a legal service a process that is required that the FBI understands that we must meet.
I understand. Thank you. U.S. Attorney Liu, you've talked about nonviolent hate crimes, which, as you explained, you have some unique tools to address. According to the statistics that I've seen, those are the hate crimes that are on the rise more than any others: vandalism, bomb threats. You've been doing this for a long time. What do you think is the reason that those types of hate crimes are expanding more than others? And do you think that's connected at all to the increased culture of hate and intolerance we're seeing online in our public discussion, in our media, and in our politics?
Well, I mean, I had sort of the same answer that Eric and Calvin did, and we all said when you asked the question earlier. I honestly don't know the reason for, the increase in hate crimes generally, or other, assuming that the numbers are accurate, or in particular kinds of hate crimes. We do have some tools here that we can use to address property damage that is inspired by hate for a particular group or animus towards a protected class. And so I think that is a very useful tool to have because what we found in my experience is that, of course, a violent crime is just horrible, but property damage, threats, and any sort of crime that is that sort of crime is extremely upsetting to the victims too, and is really needs to be addressed. I want to say just a few words, if I could, Josh, about hate crime prevention, because that's something that we think a lot about in my office. And talk a bit about our partnership with both federal and local law enforcement. So because of the unique nature of DC, we have a lot of protests. We have a lot of big groups of people with different opinions who come here and protest or counter-protest or otherwise express their opinions. And we've seen that can have the potential for violence, and we've seen that in various places across the country. So something that I think we've become acutely focused on in the couple of years that I've been in this job is identifying those events. And my office works very closely with both the FBI, with the Park Police, for example, if their jurisdiction is implicated, the Capitol Police, if we think there's going to be some sort of activity at the Capitol, as well as the Metropolitan Police Department, to really bring an all agencies focus on maintaining public safety while ensuring that people are able to exercise their free speech rights. And so we've been very lucky, and I'm going to knock on wood, but I do think that it is due in significant part to what our law enforcement partners are doing, that we have had all sorts of First Amendment activity go on in the city in the last couple of years, and we really have seen it's been relatively peaceful, and we really want to keep it that way.
Thank you so much. Let me go back to you, Mr. Shivers. We've heard a lot in the media and in Congress about this administration's programs to engage communities regarding hate crimes prevention and some of the changes, frankly, some of the rollbacks in some of those programs. And I'm wondering if you, from your law enforcement perspective, if you can first talk about why those changes were made and how they've affected the work of FBI and other law enforcement officials who are seeking to build relationships with communities in the midst of an environment of smaller budgets and sometimes cuts in those very programs.
Sure. So I'm not in a position to speak to any rollbacks from the administration. Again, my focus is really on the FBI and our partnership with the Department of Justice and what we're doing going forward. And so what I can say is that the FBI has not rolled back its community engagement. It has not rolled back its training, its partnerships. In fact, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would say that we have actually, if not met, more than likely, and again, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but in running the program, I can say we have not rolled back any of our training. What we recognize and understand is the importance, and I've talked about partnerships, and I think my partners here, Eric and Jessie, Lou, have done that as well. And again, the engagement with the community, the engagement with the prosecutors, both on the federal level and the state and local level, are all critical. So I can only speak to what the FBI is doing, and again, we have not regressed at all in our engagement, in our partnerships, and engaging with the community. We, again, are focused on educating and collaborating. And again, if there's an incident, it cannot be the first time that we interact with the community. It cannot be the first time. So that's where the engagement is critical.
Thank you so much. Mr. DREIBAND, let me ask you about DOJ policy. In what we see in the public as a rise in white nationalist groups, anti-Muslim groups, and their use in violence in support of their beliefs, is the DOJ prioritizing investigation and prosecution of those associated with those groups who act violently?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can't discuss publicly our investigations, but we can talk about our prosecutions that are public, and the answer is yes. Anyone who, in the name of white supremacist ideology, commits a hate crime where we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the elements of the federal criminal hate crime statutes are satisfied will be prosecuted, typically by prosecutors from the Civil Rights Division's criminal section, working with the United States Attorney Office. Now, as Calvin said, let me just add, we do work with state and local law enforcement on these cases, and there are times when appropriate, when consulting with, say, the local district attorney or local state prosecutors, where they may go first with their case, and we may stay our case or our proceedings and pending the outcome in the state courts. But yes, it remains a priority. It has been a priority since Attorney General Sessions was here, and continues to be a priority under Attorney General Barr.
I understand. Thank you. It occurs to me that we're all gathered here not just to learn about what the government is doing on hate crimes, but to learn about what we all can do. So I thought we might take this opportunity of the last round of questions to ask our officials and our experts here, what can we in the community, we in the media, look out for, do, report? What practical action steps can we all take to help you do your job in preventing and prosecuting hate crimes, but also to do our job, which is to defend our communities and our values? And let me start with Eric and go right down the line.
Okay, I'll be very brief. I think that, to me, the best thing you can do, at least from where I sit here at the Justice Department, is be vigilant and alert and cooperate with the FBI, United States attorneys, and the Civil Rights Division prosecutors if you learn of any kind of even potential hate crime. There are times, as I mentioned, with respect to certain of our statutes, conspiracy statutes in particular, where if we become aware of something, or if the FBI does, or even the local police or law enforcement become aware of something that may be brewing in the community, that we can take action to prevent it before it happens. So I would encourage you and your communities to be vigilant in that respect.
Thank you.
Josh, let me just reiterate the fact that I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think this summit is very important, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the FBI's not only civil rights program, but more specifically hate crimes. What I would say is just continued community engagement, and the old adage, if you see something, say something. I think that's very important. Although I drew a distinction with hate crimes and hate incidents, reporting those are just as important. As Ms. Liu pointed out, in some instances, we're obviously focused on federal law and federal prosecution, but as I mentioned, we work very closely with our state and local partners, and so it's not whether or not we can prosecute a case federally or conduct an investigation federally. It's providing support to all of our partners, whether that's our federal partners, our state and local partners, and also addressing incidents that happen within communities. Again, our focus is not that this is a federal violation or federal crime. If it's a crime, then we're part of the community. We understand that we have to be solid partners in the community. And so I think the dialogue and the communication, not only with the FBI, but with state and local partners and the community as a whole, is very important.
So I apologize in advance for giving Calvin more work here, but I would just echo the call from my fellow panelists to report suspicious incidents early. I'll give you one example. We had a case in which a defendant would repeatedly call synagogues, and he would just make harassing phone calls. We ultimately decided after investigation that we were not going to charge a hate crime. We charged him with 2 counts of misdemeanor stalking, and no violence resulted from it. But we were very glad, to get a report early. And we want to be, kept in the loop, we as law enforcement, writ large, of anything that seems off or suspicious, and at least, gives us the chance to try to prevent something happening, even if no crime has been committed to that point. And I would also echo my colleagues' call for continued engagement. My office runs something we call the Clergy Ambassador Program. We spend a lot of time with religious leaders, and if there's anybody in the room who has not engaged with us and would like to, it'll be an open invitation to please come and talk to me, and maybe we can find a way to work together. But I think that dialogue between we as law enforcement and the communities that we serve is critical.
Thank you so much for advancing that dialogue today. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, panelists, for a very informative discussion. We will take a brief break to rearrange the stage, and we will resume the program and our final discussion in just a few minutes. It is now my privilege to introduce the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Policy, Beth Williams. Assistant Attorney General Williams was sworn into the department on August 21st, 2017, after unanimous confirmation in the United States Senate. As the head of the Office of Legal Policy, Assistant Attorney General Williams oversees the department's policymaking functions and serves as the co-vice chair of the Attorney General's Task Force on Religious Liberty. AAG Williams previously served as special counsel to the United States Senate Committee on the Judiciary, worked in private practice, and served as a law clerk to Judge Richard C. Wesley of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Assistant Attorney General Beth Williams.
Thank you, John, for your kind introduction. I'm honored to be here to facilitate a discussion about the administration's efforts to combat anti-Semitism. I'm also honored to serve in a department that stands for the rights of all Americans, including those of Jewish faith, to worship in safety and to practice their religion freely. As we heard during the last panel, one important way that the department protects those rights is by investigating and prosecuting hate crimes. But of course, the department supports Americans of faith in other ways. Its Place to Worship initiative has increased enforcement of a federal law that protects places of worship, including synagogues, in the zoning and landmarking process. This April, Attorney General Barr welcomed an administration-wide rule that protects the rights of federal employees to take time away from work for their religious observances. And in 2017, then Attorney General Sessions issued a memorandum outlining the protections under federal law for religious liberty. As the head of the Office of Legal Policy and as a co-vice chair of the Religious Liberty Task Force, I help ensure that the department continues to protect the constitutional and statutory rights discussed in the memorandum. That work has been a distinct privilege. As the memorandum explained, religious liberty is not merely a right to personal religious beliefs or even to worship in a sacred place. Except in the narrowest circumstances, no one should be forced to choose between living out his or her faith and complying with the law. I'm honored today to be joined on stage by two leaders who are at the forefront of the administration's efforts to protect the freedom of worship and to combat foreign and domestic threats to that freedom: Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and FBI Director Christopher Wray. Secretary Mnuchin and Director Wray will each give an address, and we will conclude as both have other engagements. But we are incredibly thankful to both for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us here today. I'll now introduce the Secretary. Secretary Mnuchin was sworn in as the 77th Secretary of the Treasury on February 13th, 2017. As Secretary, Mr. Mnuchin is responsible for the U.S. Treasury, whose mission is to maintain a strong economy, foster economic growth, and create job opportunities by promoting the conditions that enable prosperity at home and abroad. He is also responsible for strengthening national security by combating economic threats and protecting our financial system, as well as managing the U.S. government's finances. Last year, he helped lead the delegation that opened the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. His department's sanctions program has been an essential element of our country's fight against terrorism. Thank you so much for joining us, Secretary Mnuchin.
Thank you, Beth, for that introduction, and Director Wray for welcoming me to the Department of Justice. I was actually giving a press conference earlier today at the White House on cryptocurrency and the debt ceiling, and I got asked about anti-Semitism, so I gave a little bit of an advertisement for my speech here today. I said I will be speaking at DOJ on anti-Semitism later today. A few months after I became Treasury Secretary, I traveled to the Middle East for the first time. On that trip, I went to Israel and visited the holy sites. It was a profoundly moving experience to light a candle and tour Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. It is a place that commemorates the life and death of 6 million Jews who were victims of the Holocaust. That experience was a solemn reminder of the atrocity that we must never forget and we must fight to prevent every single day. Last year, I returned to the Middle East. I had the great honor of being part of the President's delegation and traveling with Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner to open the United States Embassy to Israel in Jerusalem. The event was 23 years in the making. The 1995, the 104th United States Congress passed with enormous bipartisan support the historic Jerusalem Embassy Act. Yet more than 20 years, the promise of recognizing the eternal capital went unfulfilled by administrations of both parties. Many critics said it could not be done or it should not be done. President Trump did it, and it was my great honor to be there for the ceremony to help fulfill the promise to the Jewish Americans and the people of Israel that was passed by Congress. Last month, I returned to the Middle East for the Peace to Prosperity Summit in Bahrain. It was a successful event that outlined the incentives for strategic economic investments that will lead to peace and stability in the region that has for too long been known for conflict. As we work to stem violence and promote peace overseas, unfortunately, we are seeing the rise of anti-Semitism both home and abroad. At times, that anti-Semitism takes the form of violence. In October, I traveled with President Trump, the First Lady, Ivanka, and Jared to Pittsburgh, following the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, where 11 innocent people lost their lives. Amidst the tragedy and profound sadness, we found inspiration in the community, the support people showed for one another, and the bravery of the first responders who saved so many lives. Recognizing the need to continue defeating hateful ideology, I'd like to discuss briefly some of the work we do at Treasury. As Secretary, I encouraged my German counterpart, the Finance Minister, to increase funds for the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, known as Claims Conference, which is based in New York. I am pleased with the additional funding his ministry provided. The program currently serves over 75,000 Holocaust survivors receiving pensions and home care in the late stage of their lives, and this funding goes towards meeting vital needs, including food and medicine. At a time when anti-Semitism is rising, Holocaust education is also critically important. The Claims Conference devotes millions of dollars per year for worldwide Shoah education, which supplements its decades of experience as a voice for survivors and other Jewish people around the world. Finally, I want to mention Treasury's work in the area of terrorism and financial intelligence. I am proud that we use our economic authorities, including sanctions, to disrupt funding and isolate human rights abusers. In February, we also sanctioned New Horizon for holding international conferences supporting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds forces. They were recruiting, gathering intelligence, and propagating anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. I am pleased to join you here today to discuss this important work of combating anti-Semitism. All of us have the tools to defeat it. It is up to us in this room and the wider audiences we collectively reach to fight for safety, equality, and justice for the Jewish people. I am honored to be here with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Secretary Mnuchin. I'll now introduce Director Wray. Christopher Wray became the 8th Director of the FBI on August 2nd, 2017. His decade of DOJ service has included positions as an Assistant U.S. Attorney, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, and Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division, where he supervised the section that later became the National Security Division. As the head of the FBI, his duties include overseeing federal hate crime and terrorism investigations. Under his leadership, the FBI has spearheaded efforts to protect religious communities and places of worship from violence, including trainings on how to make them more secure. Thank you very much for being here with us, Director Wray.
Thanks, Beth. On April 5th of 1968, a day after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy lamented, what he called the mindless menace of violence in America. He said that whenever we tear at the fabric of life that people have woven for themselves and their families, the whole nation is degraded, and he called on Americans to remember that those who live with us are our brothers and sisters who seek, and I quote, nothing but the chance to live out their lives in purpose and happiness. And in many ways, we still confront that same mindless menace of violence. We still confront people who trade in hatred, people who seek to harm others because of where they come from, how they worship, what they look like, or who they love. And that's why shining a spotlight on anti-Semitism is so important. At the FBI, our mission is simple but profound: to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And battling hate crime is one of our priorities, because hate crime strikes at the very heart of who we are as a society. It strikes at the heart of every individual targeted because of who they are. It's no secret that our society has become more divisive. Everybody's got an opinion, and we cherish that freedom of speech even when we don't agree. But words can quickly turn to violence, and hate can quickly become hate crime. And we're determined to bring those who would act on such hatred to justice. People like James Fields, who received a life sentence for killing Heather Heyer in Charlottesville in 2017. People like Izmir Koch, sentenced to 30 months in prison for beating a man he believed to be Jewish in Cincinnati in 2017. Most hate crime investigations are, by their very nature, reactive. In other words, we get involved after the fact. But we're also working hard to identify and prevent hate crime. First, we're coordinating with our state and local law enforcement partners, even when we're not pursuing federal charges, because we learn more when we work these cases together. Second, we're working with civil rights and minority groups and with faith communities to build trusted relationships. As they say, the best time to patch the roof is when the sun is shining, not when the bad weather comes. And we shouldn't be meeting for the first time in the wake of a crisis. Third, we're training our partners, both in law enforcement and the communities we serve, so that everyone's got a better understanding of what hate crime is and how we can help. We also confront a growing domestic terrorism threat. And though we talk sometimes about hate crime and domestic terrorism as separate challenges, the reality is they're not mutually exclusive. And we're taking a whole of FBI approach to those threats. So we investigate individuals who take or plan to take violent or criminal action in furtherance of an ideology like racial or religious bias or anti-government sentiment. We're concerned about lone offenders, like the man who attacked the Chabad of Poway synagogue, individuals who act without a clear group affiliation and without guidance, making them that much more difficult to identify, investigate, and disrupt. We're also worried about racially motivated violent extremists. Just to pick one example, just last November, an individual we arrested on a firearms charge talked about attacking a synagogue to incite a so-called race revolution. In June, we established the Domestic Terrorism Hate Crimes Fusion Cell. Our Fusion Cell brings together experts from both our criminal investigative and counterterrorism divisions. They're not just focused on current attacks, on what we're seeing right now, they're focused on what we haven't yet seen, in some cases what we haven't yet imagined, and on what we need to do to stop that. But we know we can't do it alone, and through our JTTFs, our Joint Terrorism Task Forces, we get the local perspective on what's actually happening out in our communities. But we've also got to work closely with our community partners. We have community outreach specialists who work with members of the Jewish community to talk about what we're seeing and to explore how we can help even better. A number of our FBI field offices have hosted active shooter exercises and what we call protecting houses of worship presentations with local synagogues to build awareness. We just finished, just last month, hosting a faith-based summit at FBI headquarters for representatives of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and other religious groups. That kind of communication, those kinds of relationships are so important to the work we do. I'll pick one example. In March of 2017, we investigated, just in that 1 month, more than 287 threatening phone calls and emails, including bomb threats, to Jewish community centers and the Anti-Defamation League. Multiple FBI offices investigated those threats, bringing together experts from our cyber, criminal, and counterterrorism divisions, as well as technical and behavioral analysis specialists. We held dozens of calls and met in person with Jewish group leaders to explain what we were doing to find the person responsible. And with the help of our counterparts in Israel, we indicted a hacker who had made similar threats in the UK, in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And in June of last year, a Tel Aviv court sentenced the guy to 10 years in prison. Cases like that instill fear. They make you feel vulnerable. They make you feel targeted. And that can be physically, emotionally, and psychologically taxing. And we want to help you understand those threats from our perspective and to give you the tools you need to protect yourselves. I also want to highlight one of the ways we're working with the Jewish community to be better at what we do. We require, as some of you know, all new FBI agents and analysts to visit the Holocaust Museum through the ADL's Law Enforcement and Society program. And we do that because we believe that all our folks need to know and understand our constraints under the Constitution and the rule of law. We've got to live it and breathe it. We recognize that the FBI's own history hasn't come without missteps, but we take those mistakes and we learn from them. And that's why programs like that are so important to our institutional well-being. They give us a closer look at who we can become as law enforcement officers and as people if we're not constantly safeguarding and advocating for civil rights and civil liberties. Every day, we remind ourselves that there is nothing more important than the work we do, the people we do the work with, and the people we do the work for. And it's that last element that I want to turn to for just a moment, the people we do the work for. We're working every day to stop hate crime, but when we can't prevent a hate crime, our agents and analysts will move heaven and earth to find those responsible. FBI victim specialists across the country will do everything they can to help heal the victims, their families, and their communities. After the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the FBI's Victim Services Response Team, which is made up of agents, analysts, and victim specialists, set up a family assistance center. They provided what the community needed most, from things on the one hand like food and clothing, to on the other hand, grief counseling, financial assistance, and one-stop shopping for federal resources. Victim specialists understand the emotional impact on victims and their families, and they took special care to gather and clean personal effects, from the kippahs and talids the victims were wearing to the most mundane but necessary items, things like car keys. A few weeks after the attack, our victim specialists hosted a preparedness briefing for Jewish community members from around the country in the hope that no other Jewish community would have to live through that kind of horror. We're going to keep doing everything we can to help for the people who need it the most, because the way we look at it, we're not just law enforcement, we're part of the community, and we're in this together. When we face stark contrasts in the way we view the world, and when we face something so shocking we can't quite wrap our brains around what just happened and why, we need to remind ourselves that there is, in fact, still good in the world, and that most people are, in fact, rational, law-abiding citizens. It can be disheartening to realize deep down that there's always going to be somebody out there who will seek to harm others out of hatred or racially motivated violent extremism. Doesn't make sense, but hatred isn't grounded in logic. So that just means that we need to stay vigilant and work even harder to counteract the hatred and the violence and the discontent. We can't eradicate hate, we can't end prejudice, but we can stand together. And everybody in this hall stands on the side of the good and the just. We stand on the side of fairness and equality and the freedoms on which this country was founded. So thank you for working with us to keep our communities safe. Thank you.
I want to thank the Secretary and the Director for having joined us and for their leadership on these issues. We are grateful to both of them. I'll now turn it over to Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General John GORE to conclude the summit. Thank you.
We thank all of the moderators, panelists, and speakers who joined us today, including Special Envoy Carr, Director Wray, Deputy Attorney General Rosen, Secretary DeVos, Secretary Mnuchin, and Attorney General Barr. We thank you for your presence and your partnership here today. To exit the building, please make your way to the staircase in the back of the Great Hall. Head downstairs. Staff members are standing by to assist you. Thank you again for everything, and good afternoon.